Okay, we are live. Today we are joined by Helen Kramer, and this is the third part of a 6-week series. Hello, we apologize for being a little delayed. We had some tech issues.
Right.
But today is the third of six, and we're going to be discussing one of my, I think, favorite and most transformative concepts for me, which is about neutrality. And this is something that Helen and I have been speaking about for months and about a year. And it's been really something that I take with me and I think of daily as I go into a phone conversation or a meeting. And I'll let Helen get into the meat of it. But for me, it just has released any pressure or stress that
Right.
I go when I'm going into any type of situation or encounter. So, Helen, why don't you start off and let us know what this concept is and how we
Sure.
can work with it.
Okay. So, when we're working, um, it's not about being good or bad or right or wrong. So, whenever we look at our thoughts, our behaviors, our emotions, we look at, is this thought, behavior, emotion weakening you or making you strong? And ultimately, the strongest place to be is to be neutral. Because if you feel like you're craving something or you have such an aversion to it, the craving means that you don't feel full and whole, and so you're craving something that will give you that peace or wholeness. And if you have an aversion, that means that you're afraid of something. So we work to get to the place of neutrality, um, and you might have a preference for one outcome or another, but if you're stay in your wholeness and your strength, regardless of the outcome, that is the most empowered place to be. So,
Right.
I think you know, Buddhists talk about craving, um, and again, that comes from uh, the unfortunate base of the ego, which is always living in lack, never having enough. And we've all been conditioned that if I have this thing or the next thing or the other thing or something better or more than somebody else, that's when we're going to feel the wholeness and the peace.
Mm.
Um, Unfortunately, nobody ever taught us that the wholeness and peace is always in our heart. And it's a lot of the fearful thoughts and cravings and aversions that obscure that feeling of wholeness.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to use your example. We spoke over the weekend, and you had a moment where you were going to the beach,
Right.
and you were driving, and what was it, for like an hour? You drove. You were driving to the beach. You were looking for parking. There was no parking, um, and you went into it,
I,
okay,
I
whether it
really,
was going to happen or not.
I really, I was so looking forward to it was like my first day off with nothing scheduled in a long time, and I love the beach, and I was looking forward to just unwinding and maybe taking a nap on the beach, which I love. And after a lot of traffic, I got to the beach, and the parking lot was closed. So not only did I have to turn around, but there was another hour of traffic for people who were turned away from the beach, and I just felt life is so beautiful. So I came home and had a beautiful day at home. And it was so beautiful to feel like no disappointment, no frustration. And I've been working, so I don't have those things. And it was just nice to see that there it was. It was just peace and neutrality.
Right. Yeah. And I find, it's such a universal concept that can be in our personal as well as our professional lives, whether you go into a meeting or phone call having an expectation and really wanting a certain outcome. And I am definitely guilty of doing that in the past, where I was um, really wanting something to happen with this call. And so the way I even went into the call, I was a little nervous, and I wasn't myself because I
Right.
was tied to something happening and going a specific way that I had in my mind.
Right. And
And
and and the problem with that is when you're not neutral, unfortunately, you are in fear. What will happen if I don't get this? What will happen if this person doesn't like me? What will happen if I don't get this business opportunity? So we're in fear. Now, as we've talked about in previous shows, when we're in fear, that part of the brain does not connect well to the higher cognitive centers. So you're not as you're not as sharp. And when
Mm.
you're in the fear part of your brain, you don't have intuition. The heart is a opening for intuition and creative impulse. I don't know if I've said this before in our talks, but um, Albert Einstein, who was probably one of the most brilliant men that ever lived, said, "I never solve a problem with my mind." So when the heart is open, and when we do healing, we don't do healing by thinking. We do healing by letting consciousness come through the heart. So um, if you're in the heart, then you get creative impulses, and then you get intuition. Then you can connect to your higher cognitive centers, and then you've got two beautiful tools. But when you're if you're nervous about a call, you're not going to be as creative. And the other thing is, we have something that's called brain to brain communication. So if you see a herd of animals and a predator comes in, they can signal each other in an instant to flee. The fear is transmitted. Um, so if you're nervous on the phone, then that other person is picking up your anxiety, and it's likely on a subliminal level for them to go into their anxiety. So already the possibility of a helpful and creative connection is diminished. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to that, I've noticed just such a change when I don't go into it with the expectation of an outcome, and I'm
Right.
neutral on wherever it goes, even if it's just connecting. If it doesn't lead to an opportunity or it doesn't lead to
Right.
more collaboration, I just go into it very open, and I find that openness and presence leads to different ways of the conversation going that I think I might have been so much more rigid in the past on when
That's
I'm
right. That's
going
right.
into going into a scenario. And yeah.
Yeah. Fear necessarily makes you more rigid. It narrows you. It's a contracted energy. So when you can feel, and I don't know if you've done this, but I would suggest it to other people. If you have something that might be stressful or anxiety provoking for yourself, we've talked before. Do do some breathing. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8, like 4 times, because that will connect you to your parasympathetic, slowed, peaceful part of your autonomic nervous system. And then in general, you can do that through the day, and then bring up a peaceful memory, a time you were on the beach, a time you were playing with a favorite pet or a baby or something that's just pure peace and not contaminated. Go in, go into a communication with somebody in that state of peace, because just as I was saying before, the fear is contagious. The peace might be too. If the
Mm.
person is able to receive it, if they're shut down, there's nothing you're going to be able to do to open them up. But if they have the possibility of being opened up, your peace will invite them to be peaceful too. And again, on a kind of subliminal level, will make them feel comfortable with you, because your strength is in being peaceful, not being anxious.
Mm. Yeah, and I want to go through the exercise you had mentioned this weekend to do the right shoulder, left shoulder that I think helps get people or has helped me in the past
It, it,
resonate with that
yeah, it
concept.
helps realign the nervous system. So, okay, so I'll use the example, and you can, if you want me, if you have one. So, I didn't need to do this, but if the issue was for me going to the beach or not being able to get into the beach, that would be the opposites, right? So I want to be neutral for getting into the beach and not being able to get into the beach. So the way you reset the nervous system for neutrality is, so on my left shoulder, I move my head, I'm getting into the beach. On the right shoulder, I'm not getting into the beach. And you may feel when you start, there's a charge. One feels better than the other, and you just go back and forth. I'm getting to the beach. I'm not getting to the beach, and you go back and forth until the charge is gone. And that's what neutrality is. There's no charge.
Right. Helen, can you look at your computer and turn off the sound? Because I think that's you dinging a lot in the background, just in
Oh,
case.
oh,
Um,
okay,
but I also I've found this useful even in while you do that. I'm just gonna
okay. I think
there you go.
I think we're okay
That's
now.
better.
Okay, so
I think it's really also a beautiful thing to utilize in relationships because I've been in a now it's been in a year-long
absolutely
relationship, and we just celebrated our anniversary. But we've talked about that in the past, and how I at times in the beginning was more tied and connected to making the relationship work than not. So there was some work that we did in getting myself comfortable with being in this relationship with him or not being in this relationship with him, and being neutral with that while
right,
having a preference like you're saying, and I use that languaging all the time. I have a preference for it to go this way, but I get myself energetically, I'll sit and be okay and get neutral with it happening or not.
right.
And releasing that is just like it's just a breath of fresh air. Like
That's right.
the weight's released. I'm like, I go into a meeting and I'm like, great. I feel like I can connect with you. I can see how this goes. I can see if I'm connecting or if I'm like aligned with the people and what the conversation leads to, but I'm not um, tied to any specific outcome or like,
And you're so much more inviting when you're in that place.
mm,
You know,
right. Absolutely.
it's like being someplace where there's loud, jangling music, which is equivalent to somebody being stressed, or there's something very smooth and lyrical, and they're just, you know, your muscles relax. So
Right.
we want um, we want to be inviting. If I would say you can invite somebody to respond from their higher self, but you can't make them accept the invitation. So if you're in peace,
Mm,
it's an invitation. But if somebody is closed, then they might not even read the invitation.
right. We call this the tools for a liberated life, and I personally feel like this is one of the most empowering tools out of the six that we're covering for me, that I really do utilize daily.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think also it's good to let people know that your mind will not be neutral. So so your mind might be saying, but it'll be so much better if that happens, or that's going to be horrible if that doesn't happen. And the hardest part of our growth is not trusting what our mind says, not giving it power, because the mind does not know peace. The heart knows peace. The heart knows wholeness. The heart knows oneness, but the mind doesn't. So if you're waiting for your mind to get on board, you, you might be into your next life because the mind doesn't know peace. The one thing that I will say that's such a nice treat is that I learned not to follow my mind, and after a long period of time of not following my mind, it just doesn't generate the same garbage. It,
mm,
it
to be living more in your heart and being
yeah,
a little bit.
when I always look at change as a kind of morphing process. That it's
Mm,
sometimes you can have intense openings, and other times it's just a little bit more peace. Um, and I noticed years ago that I used to look forward to dinner to sort of de-stress. I would de-stress by eating. I'd make a big salad and slowly eat my salad. And then it was like, stress? What stress? What? I don't have to unwind. I flowed through my day and now I'm flowing into my evening. So it wasn't something like happened like that, but when it happened, you can really feel that shift.
right. And I to want to keep giving examples for neutrality to really drive in the concept of that. So I went down to this project, as you know, in Miami. And I went into it very open. I was excited for the possibility of it. Um, and but I wasn't tied to any specific outcome. And I remember going into it very open. If this is the right fit, if this is like
Right.
aligned and it seems like it's all collaborative, wonderful. If it's not, then like let me get those signs or that those experiences that show me that that's not the case. And immediately I got a sign, or I met the person, and it made me realize this isn't the right fit.
Right.
But if I had gone in so tied to the outcome, so focused on making this opportunity work for my business, I might have looked past that. And I have been involved with businesses in the past where the relationships that we start out with weren't aligned, which have led to bigger problems down the road. But I might have glossed over that if I was so focused on
Right.
making this work.
That's right. I mean, without even reading all the information that you were getting,
Right.
that even if it looked like it was working, it was never going to be what you wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
people do this in relationships all the time.
I can
How many
imagine.
times how many times a woman has come in crying because she found out on Facebook that her boyfriend's been cheating. And if I say, when did you first know this? Right from the very beginning, I suspected, but I was so afraid to be alone. I was so afraid to give up the good stuff that that we overlook the signs, and of course, they're not overlookable because they will come up to bite you at some point. So, being present without being afraid that you won't that of any outcome means that you're going to read things more quickly. So if a woman that I was talking about, if she had paid attention to those signs right away and not been afraid of being alone, she would have saved herself 2 years of being in a relationship that was leaving her alone anyway because it was not sustainable.
Right. Yeah. It's just such a, it's a simple concept, but it's really has been so helpful for me. And I just can't get over really how much I utilize this. And I'm going to use this example, which maybe not a lot of people can relate to, but I'm obviously on a boat. So I'm on the boat. You can see all the boats in the background. And driving a boat can be rather stressful at times. It can be. In the past, in the beginning, it really was. And I had a few people on 2 weeks ago. And in the past, I would have been so stressed and worried about something going wrong, an engine going down, something happening. And this time was so smooth because I remember
Right.
going into it thinking, in my brain did bring, okay, what if something happens? And I thought, you know what? If something happens, something happens.
That's right.
My preference would be for this to go nice and smoothly, for there to be no issues and it to be like no problems, smooth sailing, so to speak. But the other part of me was thinking, you know what? If something happens, I'll handle it. I
Right.
will, I trust myself enough to know that I'll figure it out and we'll work through it. So
And
I released so much of that,
right.
and
And
the
see,
whole trip was so much more enjoyable
sure.
because of it.
And one of our what I call interferences to living the most fulfilled life is that you learn this pattern of being vigilant. You know, in your brain, what if this happens? What if that happens? Because when you're a young child, you don't have the resources for all the what ifs. If your fear and stress are caused by the fact that your parents aren't ideally nurturing you, then your brain will become vigilant because you do feel in danger. But when your brain is telling you if there's a problem with the boat or whatever, yeah, you don't want to have a problem. But I developed a mantra years ago. I can handle everything I need to handle. So then there's no anticipatory angst because, yeah, as they say, shit happens. Something will happen. But if you know that you can handle it, if you feel yourself as a resourceful adult, it's not a big deal.
Right, right. So, what are some other ways and other tools that people can kind of remember this throughout the day on neutrality? I know that the shoulder one, I think is a really helpful way as well.
Well, what I was going to say is that um, we I talk a lot about creating the desired state. So let's say, okay, I wanted to go to the beach because I wanted to just have nothing to do, nobody to talk to, and if I felt like taking a nap, I would take a nap. And so if I if I feel what the desired state is, I can feel that without going to the beach.
Mm.
If you feel like I want this relationship, well, what would happen if you had the perfect relationship? And if you ask people that, they'll say, I feel peaceful, I feel at home. So, one way to um, stay neutral is to recognize that whatever you're looking for by an outcome is already there if you learn how to focus inward. Did that make
Mm.
sense?
Hmm.
So we're in our culture, we're conditioned to feel that everything is outside of us. If we have people that value us, adore us, love us, whatever it is, if we have accomplishments that other people acknowledge, that's going to make us feel good, and that's going to make us feel good. And the reality is, I think, it reminds me of people who thought if they could only lose weight, then their life would be perfect. And then they lose weight and they have all the same issues that they had when they were heavier. Because if you don't know how to get to your heart, there is no magic fix. There is no one thing that you get that's going to remove all the conditioning that makes you feel unworthy or unlovable.
Mm. And so I'll continue with that a little bit of living in your heart or through your heart. What are some additional ways that are helpful for you to be living in your heart?
Well, I practiced a lot. I don't have to do that now, but I used to practice every time I had a good experience. I would just relish it. I would just savor it. So it might be a beautiful dream. It might be a lovely experience in nature. And if you want to get out of the conditioned fear that we all have, then we want to practice something else that was our birthright, but we may not have had the circumstances that allowed us to live in that state. If you see children that are really loved and happy, I have I have a video that I took of my niece's kids on my roof playing on a sliding pond where one would go down and the other one would stand at the end, and then when the other one came down, they'd fall on top of each other and giggle and giggle and giggle. That's what children who are loved do. That incredible laughter that kids have because they're in the moment and they're in joy and they're not in fear. And
Mm.
we all have that in us, even though it's covered up. And this is what all of our work is about, to get us to remove the interferences, the layers of conditioning, and then get back to that place of beautiful joy and freedom.
Mm.
So if you practice, um, oh, I'll tell you, one of my best practicings was many, many years ago when I had left my first husband and I was frantic. I lost my soulmate. Am I ever going to have another one? And I could,
Mm.
and after a couple of years, I said, Helen, this is, you're too frenetic. So I imagined myself with a man lying on a blanket in Central Park, and he was looking at me and he could see my soul. He just looked at me with love. And I just practiced that over and over again till I had that quiet sense of what it was like to be loved. And then I met my husband in a sort of business situation and we worked on a project together. And then as I got to know him, I said, God damn, he's the man on the blanket. And
Wow.
it was amazing. I had it all planned out. I was going to working on a television show, so I could, because I had consulted for 60 Minutes in 2020. Because when you're in your private practice, where are you going to meet anybody? So
Right.
I said that doing something in television. I never wanted to be on TV, never interested in it. But we worked together and we created a pilot. And then I said, I'd rather nest when we moved in together. So, but I had it all, that whole sense of what it was like to be with somebody that really loved me and saw me in a deeply loving way. And I never thought it was
Mm.
going to be him. I thought we were just going to collaborate on a project. But we had,
Wow.
until he died, we had 26 years of blissful love.
Wow. And you
Yeah.
were like putting yourself in that state. You were
I was
practicing
putting
that.
myself in a state,
Yeah.
and I know myself enough to know that I wouldn't have received it if I hadn't practiced it, because I was looking. He was short. I needed a tall man. I needed this, all this garbage. Um, but the feel was so familiar and so perfect that there was just n- nothing but attraction to that feel. But I knew
Yeah.
it. I already knew it inside of me.
Yeah. I feel the most profound thing for me is really having learned to live and be so much more in touch with my heart. That's we're
Yeah.
just not trained as a society to do, and wasn't even aware of the concept when in my early 20s. And it's beautiful when you do drop in your heart and you can tap into it and feel you feel situations you want to be in, feel people you want to be around. Your body, you start feeling and
And Martin,
listening.
when you're in your heart, you have what you need. And
Mm,
then when you're in your heart, when I first started doing the healing work, I was in my head so much because I was had been sick all the time, just trying to figure out, did I eat the wrong thing? Should I take extra vitamin? This, so blah, 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 blah. And then when I started opening, it was like, oh my God, there were clouds in the sky.
oh wow.
And all of a sudden, I started seeing things that were kind of somewhere in the background, but not in the foreground. And the more you're in that peaceful state, this morning I was up, I get up very early. I was dancing on my deck. The sun was coming up, the moon was still in the sky, the sun is coming through the trees, and I see um, the spikes, like a million spikes of color of red, yellow, gold, and green coming from the sun, and it's just so magnificent. So what what do I need? Why
Mm,
would it be looking for fame, fortune, whatever, when the world is so beautiful when you're present?
mm, absolutely. I love that image.
Yeah.
Well, this was beautiful. I love we got off a little talking about living through the heart, but I love that
Well,
concept and
that's
topic
what
as
a
well.
neutrality is.
Mm.
You can only
Oh.
see if you're there are only two states of being, as we've said before. You're either in the
Mm,
heart, which is open. There's no duality. There's only neutrality, or you're in fear,
mm.
and the fear is not neutral. I have to
Right.
have this.
Yeah. That makes total sense. Well, good. I'm glad we kept on track.
Okay.
Is there anything else you're
I
thinking
never
to
worry
add?
when I'm talking to you.
Oh, I know. We always flow so beautifully. Is there any other elements you would like to add on this
No,
topic before
just
we close this one?
no, just practice resurrecting a state that feels good, so that when you're doing that, even just on a physiological level, not necessarily emotional or spiritual, when you're practicing a state that feels good, you're creating feel good chemicals. Like I had I had a session with a client who's been trying to wean him. He was on antidepressants way before he met me, and we're working on the phone. He said, I'm trying to get off the antidepressants have dulled me. I don't have the same passion for music and things that I used to have. So and he said, when I tried to stop altogether, I was just so anxious that I couldn't wean myself off. So I said, okay, remember a time when you felt passionate about music. And he was remembering a time where he saw the Rolling Stones live in concert. I said, go back there. Well, all the excitement came up, even though he said the medication is dulling it, but he was able to break through the dullness by just imagining it.
Wow.
So that's how I work with
Yeah,
people, so they produce their own neurotransmitters and they don't need the pharmaceuticals that mess up your brain.
I know. And there's so many people. I'm surprised at times talking to friends that I wouldn't expect to be on it.
Yeah,
The prevalence.
yeah, yeah. And I had a client's insurance company want me to do an evaluation, and I was talking about her anxiety and depression, and the woman who was interviewing me said, "Well, why don't you put her on an antidepressant?" I said, "Well, you know that the antidepressants, let's say if you're getting an SSRI, which works with serotonin receptors, when the antidepressant, when you take them, your body starts to make less serotonin,
Hmm.
and then that creates a depression, and that creates a dependence." So I said the whole thing, and she says to me, "Yeah, you are right." I'm saying, "Oh God, I'm right, but you're pushing something that's going to permanently
Right.
limit a human being
Right.
so that you can save money on claims."
Yeah, I had a similar experience too. I've been, as we've talked about, HIV positive for 20 years, and as part of that, like it's typical, or they say it's typical that your body starts reducing its production of testosterone, and so I started taking topical testosterone. Well, then years later, I went to an herbalist who said, I think we can get you off of that. Your body is going to stop producing it because
Right.
you're taking it. So I think if we can give you some herbs, we're going to be able to help you
Your
naturally
body
start
make,
producing it.
yeah,
And since I started taking the herbs, I got off of the testosterone, the pharmaceutical one, and I've never had to go back on to taking it. My body has now just started producing its own.
yeah, there are natural ways to build neurotransmitters and hormones that support your body making it and don't
Mm,
thwart it by giving it. There's there's something called endogenous and exogenous. Exogenous is what you take. What you want to do is stimulate the endogenous to be produced.
mm.
You want to stimulate your body to make it.
Well, that'll be a whole nother
Okay.
another topic for another day. But I love all of our topics. We're always in a co-creative space. So, well,
We've got good synergy, huh?
we do. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for
Okay.
everyone who's listening. And if anybody wants to have a specific topic that you want us to dive into in the future, please always write it in the comments, and we'd love to engage with you. So, thank you so much. Thank you, Helen, and I
Okay.
hope
Everybody
everyone has
have
a
a
beautiful
great
day.
day. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take care.